I'd always yearned for a simple, ordinary family. Growing up in foster care, I was all alone in the world. I had foster parents as a child, but no blood ties. I wanted a family of my own, a perfect family with a loving husband, adorable children, and me. So, when a kind-hearted man proposed to me, I was overjoyed. With this man, I thought I could build that ordinary family I'd always dreamed of. But in believing so, I was the world's biggest fool. My husband, George, callously ordered me around after I came home from a long day at work. "Hannah, make dinner now. Mom and Emily are starving," he'd say, barely 2 seconds in the door, and he's commanding me to make dinner. George, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, none of them ever think of cooking. My name is Hannah, and I'm stuck with this terrible family. At 29, I work for a large corporation. George, my husband, was a coworker I met at the same company. George is 30 years old, but since he couldn't get into college right after graduating high school, we graduated college at the same year. First of all, I have to mention that George is currently unemployed. He had a dispute with his boss in the sales department and quit his job. George was angry that his boss was cold-hearted, but I knew otherwise. Even though George and I were married, we worked in the same company but in different departments. I work in the General Affairs Department, handling office work. My dedication and hard work were trusted and respected by my colleagues. It was during this time that the sales department manager, where George worked, came to me for advice. As I nervously asked him what was the matter, he opened his mouth tiredly. "Today, your husband suddenly handed in his resignation. Were you aware of this?" Shocked by the manager's hesitant question, I shook my head. "I wasn't told anything. Did something happen?" In response to my visible confusion, having truly not been consulted about anything, the manager explained the situation. I respect my workers' personal lives as much as I can, but according to the sales manager, George would casually leave work, even if his tasks were not finished. Moreover, he would forcefully dump his overtime work on his timid colleagues. When the manager confronted him about this, he lashed out in anger. George had falsely claimed that we shared housework since we both worked. Furthermore, he stubbornly insisted on leaving work on time, stating that he was worried about his frail mother and sister. When he used his family situation as an excuse, the management could not be strict with him. However, a colleague who had been burdened with George's work complained of mental and physical stress and wanted to resign. The manager advised George that if he prioritizes his family, he should finish his work on his own. George, angry that his argument was not accepted, quit his job on his own accord. To be frank, I'm relieved that he quit while being considerate of my feelings, the sales manager expressed his honest thoughts. George was arrogant and burdened others despite his incompetency. When his boss pointed this out, he would react angrily without reflecting on his behavior. From what I hear, George was nothing but a liability to the sales department. Feeling guilty, I apologized profusely. "I'm deeply sorry for the trouble caused to everyone in the sales department," I said. The kind sales department manager reassured me that it was not my fault and he was disgusted by George, who had quit his job on a whim without consulting his wife. "Just to confirm, is he really doing housework and are your family members sick?" "All his claims are false. I do all the housework and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law are healthy," I confessed. Upon hearing my testimony, the manager sympathized sincerely, saying, "I see, that's tough. And that's how my husband, George, ended up unemployed. He believed that he would get a new job right away, but the real world is harsh. Despite his job hunting efforts, he kept facing rejections. George's resentment on his previous boss, believing that he had bad-mouthed him to other companies. I can swear that my company does not engage in such practices. Even after submitting a resignation, it is common knowledge among working people to stay in the company for at least a month. There are matters like work handover and procedures to be dealt with. However, George slammed his resignation letter onto the manager's desk and went home the same day. It was obvious to me that such an unreasonable person would not be hired by any company. George was content with giving his small severance pay to his mother and sister. He was raised in a single-parent family with his mother and sister Emily. Their father divorced his mother and left, which seems to have been a wise decision. Both my mother-in-law and Emily are healthy and capable of working, but they do nothing. I pay for living expenses and do all the work. Whenever I ask George to help out at home, he yells at me. My mother and Emily are my precious family, girl. You should be devoted to helping us out. It made no sense to me, so I snapped back at him. Forget about your mother, but Emily is 23 years old. At least let her get a part-time job. George adored Emily a lot, who was 7 years younger than him. Emily was also taking advantage of George's kindness, pleading for pocket money. As I firmly refused to give her money, George started working part-time. It was a job managing a warehouse for a courier service. George tells people around him that he quit his job at a major corporation because his family was sick. He is a man who lies as he breathes, just to keep his reputation. And so, George's part-time earnings became Emily's dating expenses. Not doing any housework or work, Emily started going out with men. I was fed up with my mother-in-law stealing bills from my wallet out of her greed for money. Even if I talked to George about it, he would get mad at me. Take care of my mom if you're my wife. This is why I can't stand people who grew up all alone in foster care like you. My mother-in-law scoffed at me, calling me, Hannah, you're so wicked. I was living my days with the worst family. But one day, an encounter that changed my depressing daily life arrived. When I came home after buying groceries after work, there were unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. They were large-sized men's sneakers. I thought we had a guest over since the shoes were larger than George's. Then, a young man popped out. He was tall, had a handsome face, and his hair was light brown. When I thought Emily had brought her boyfriend, the man apologized. I'm sorry. I was in the words of dating Emily, but I'll take it back. Contrary to his frivolous appearance, his tone was polite, a wise young man making sound judgments. I spontaneously asked the young man, who was about to leave with his sneakers on. What's your name? I'm Emily's sister-in-law, Hannah. When I introduced myself, the young man looked up and smiled a little. He looked like a player, but he had a smart expression. The man introduced himself after he finished putting on his sneakers. I'm James, I work as a bartender. Emily was a regular at the bar he worked. According to him, Emily confessed to him, and he was about to accept, but he declined. The reason was that Emily showed her true nature and spilled everything because of alcohol. All my money is all from George's part-time job. My sister-in-law is stingy and ugly. She makes me work and do housework. James deeply regretted that he was inexperienced and couldn't spot a good woman because of that. But he's a kind-hearted person who couldn't leave drunk Emily alone and sent her home. Moreover, James paid for the taxi fare. Just at such times, both George and my mother-in-law were not at home. So, James got our house key from Emily, who is wasted, and carried her to our living room. I couldn't leave her at the entrance. I swear I didn't steal anything, ma'am. He seemed to be studying at a vocational school during the day and working as an apprentice bartender at night. He was called out by Emily after school. Emily lied about being a worker at a clothing store. James didn't see through Emily's lies and noticed her true nature at the last moment. He may look like a player, but he was a serious and sincere young man. His flashy light brown hair was his natural hair color, a mixed. This is the business card for the bar I worked at. Sorry for the trouble. He's running late, but he said he's ready to work now. I see. Thank you for bringing Emily home. Have a great shift." When I said that, James went home with a smile. Normally, I would report a young man who was at home without permission and had a connection with Emily, but I intuitively thought that James was a trustworthy person with good nature. It was a silver lining that he hadn't been deceived by Emily. When I entered the living room, Emily was indeed drunk and asleep. She was an annoyance, but to avoid dealing with a potential cold, I covered her with a blanket. Suddenly, Emily woke up and opened her mouth, unable to pronounce her words exactly. "Hey, where's James? My boyfriend with brown hair, so handsome?" Emily laughed boastfully, checked her phone, and let out a scream. James had verbally told her he couldn't date her, but it was in vain. Emily was too drunk to understand James's intentions, but clever James had politely declined through a text. Emily had no recollection of revealing her true nature. She's crying and angry, feeling like James had abandoned her. What's wrong about me? I've been deceived. The one who deceived James was Emily, but it was unfortunate for James as well, as I ignored the commotion and started cooking dinner. George and my mother-in-law came home, and upon hearing Emily's side of the story, George became furious. "Did he mess with you, Emily? Where does he work at? I'll punch him for you. We're going to demand damages." Poor Emily indeed. Emily is foolish and pitiful, but it's completely due to her own resentment, as I was worried about causing trouble for James. Emily glared at me. "Anna, did you say something to James?" She showed me the text on her phone, causing me to gasp. The message read, "I can't date a liar." Emily had drunkenly revealed everything, but she thought I was the one who tattled. George and mother-in-law also confronted me, so I explained the truth of my encounter with James at the entrance. He was trying to take care of Emily and was about to leave the house when we ran into each other. That's all I asserted. That I hadn't said anything unnecessary to him. George clicked his tongue and turned his face away from me. "Emily, let's eat sushi today. It's premium sushi." George decided to order sushi delivery on his own, and he started eating the premium sushi with my mother-in-law and Emily all on my tab, without touching any of the dinner I had prepared. As I sat eating the dinner I had prepared alone, the three of them were laughing. Eating sushi as a family is the best. It makes up for the usual terrible cooking. Really, it's so delicious it compensates for the usual bad food. George also agreed and laughed along with my mother-in-law while enduring their mockery. I felt more emptiness. Is this the family I wanted when I got married? How stupid. Suddenly, the face of my only family member with whom had become estranged after marriage floated in my mind, and for some reason, I recalled James's kind smile and was parted. A turning point for me arrived several days later while cleaning the house on my day off. George brought me a bank book. Seeing the deposit notification, I panicked. The bank book recorded the savings I had carefully accumulated before our marriage. George showed me the cash card and sealed with a triumphant look. "I'm giving the $100,000 you saved to my parents and sister. If you refuse, we divorce." This was the money I had been saving for the future expenses of our child. I thought that if we had a child, George might keep a distance from his mother and Emily, but George completely denied my dream, saying, "I care about my mother and sister more than our kid. Do as you like." I had hoped to build a happy and ordinary family, but it seemed impossible. I showed George the divorce papers that I had prepared for him. "If you accept this, we're getting a divorce. It's over between us." George joyfully filled in the necessary information on the divorce papers and handed them back. That was the end of things with him. Ignoring George, who was elated over $100,000, I packed my bags. Then I left the house and submitted the divorce papers, which got registered just fine. Having divorced George, I had returned to my adoptive father's house. My adoptive father is often absent due to work, so essentially, I live alone. When I left home, I called my adoptive father. "Hannah, Come back to your family home." I, who had been rebelling against my adoptive father since adolescence, felt like crying. Despite our strained relationship, my adoptive father forgave me, who used to be so ungrateful. Living quietly at home, memories from my childhood came back to me. The fact that I was taken from the orphanage to my adoptive father's house, at that time, I had an adoptive mother who loved me as if I were her own daughter. That adoptive mother passed away from illness when I was in junior high school. Since then, I had been rebelling against my adoptive father. I was lonely because my adoptive father was often absent due to work. But now that I think about it, both my adoptive father and the late adoptive mother cared for me. I was fixated on a normal family and had forgotten the love of those close to me. I'm divorced now. I'm having a huge burden lifted off my shoulders. With the load off my shoulders, I was now working hard. That's when I ran into James again. When I was about to leave work, I ran into the sales department manager in the elevator hall. When I started to say "good job today," the manager kindly spoke to me. "You've been through a lot, you look better than before, and I'm so happy for you." The manager, in the above my divorce with George, he sincerely praised me for holding up well. As I bowed and got into the elevator, the manager spoke in a serious tone. "There is a bar that's been talked about in the sales department. I want to go, but it's a bit too fancy for an old man like me. I heard that the manager has a wife and children who are in high school. What kind of place is it? A cafe or something?" Then the manager pleaded with me. "It's a bar. I don't drink, but I'm fascinated by bars." So, he humbly asked me to accompany him. I know the manager is a sincere person, so I decided to accompany him to the bar. The bar recommended by the manager's workers was a hidden gem in the basement. The manager said, "Don't be nervous," as he opened the door to the shop. The interior was truly chic, the kind of decor that young people would like. I followed the manager into the shop but was shocked when I looked at the bar counter. James, the bartender, was James whom I had bumped into before the divorce. He was a bit surprised too, but quickly smiled. "Welcome. It's been a long time, Hannah." Flashy and handsome bartender's words made the manager raise his voice. "Do you know each other? The women in my department have been talking about a very handsome man working here. He looks like an actor." As the manager laughed, James seemed embarrassed. "Not at all. I'm just an apprentice bartender. What would you like to order?" "I'm not used to bars, so I ordered what James recommended," I replied. The manager ordered a non-alcoholic cocktail. The bar was quiet and the clientele were refined. James's father was said to be the owner. At first, I rebelled and went to college, but I ended up being inspired by my father's work. James prepped a cocktail, and I announced that I had divorced. As I was drinking the clear blue cocktail, the boss was unusually furious. "That woman's ex-husband is outrageous. I should not have given him a retirement allowance. But did you get drunk on a non-alcoholic drink?" James prepared a mint soda, smiling at me, who was forcing a smile. He offered the Minnesota to the boss for free. The boss calmed down a bit and asked while drinking Minnesota, "Hey mister, do you send drinks from other customers, like in dramas?" James laughed cheerfully at the boss, who was asking seriously. I've never done it. Urban legend, perhaps." I was having a pleasant time at the bar when suddenly my phone rang. I was about to step outside, but James told me it was okay to answer the call here. Upon confirming who it was George, my ex-husband, whom I had divorced. I was annoyed by the interruption of the fun gathering, but I answered because the calls were persistent. Before I could ask the purpose of the call, George complained loudly. "I can't withdraw money, your balance is zero." Of course, that's after I transferred the deposit to another account. Think about it. Would anyone keep a passbook with $100,000 deposit in a house where those three greedy people live? It is for sure that it will be stolen, so I had to take measures in advance. The passbook George stole from me was a dummy. The real one was carefully hidden by me. That's why I still have the $100,000. When I told him, George was dumbfounded. He, my former mother-in-law, and Emily were having a luxurious time overseas. They gambled, and as their funds started to run out, they tried to dip into my $100,000. However, they couldn't withdraw the money and were so distressed, they called me. George threatened me to send all my assets immediately. I refused. I handed over the passbook obediently. I also gave up the house in the property division. I coldly declared that I no longer knew anything about it. In the meantime, James asked me to lend him my phone. In front of me and the boss, he ruthlessly demanded, "George, there is a tab of 3,000 of your sister's drinks. I'm sorry, but please pay." After saying only that, James returned my phone to me. "So, work hard for your beloved mother and sister, big brother." George cried for help, but I hung up the call. When I apologized for making the fuss, James offered me a cocktail with a smile. "It's on me, Andrew. Ginger ale for the boss. Let's toast the refreshing turn of events." James, the boss, and I toasted to George's miserable fate. From then on, George really fell into a hell of debt. When he was at a loss in a hotel overseas, a kind gentleman approached him. The gentleman was a precedent in finance and offered to lend him money if George was in trouble. George, who wasn't dire in need of money, jumped at it without thinking about the interest. As a result, his debt ballooned to $500,000, and he was in a crisis. The kind gentleman even prepared a job for him to repay the loan. Now it seems George is working on a fishing boat. Nobody knows where he is at now. Emily and my mother-in-law had an obligation to repay, working from morning till night except for sleeping. They sold their house and now live in a small apartment. I was living as usual at my parents' home. Today, unusually, my foster father was also there, so we were chatting. "You're well prepared, pitching my ex-husband to the deep end, the one who lent money to George and effectively sent him to a dead trap as my foster father. He was a known figure in the financial industry, well connected in various fields. George was on a family trip abroad with my parting gift. It was impossible with George's part-time job salary, but he sold all of my jewelry. George was ecstatic because he got a lot of money. He was having a blast overseas with that money. When I got married, my foster father told me to protect this one thing. He strictly ordered that when I divorce, I should leave the jewelry and the house. I'm always amazed at your audacity, Dad. My foster father had connections with the precious metal buyer that George used. He had information that George, who sold my jewelry, was going overseas. You show up just in time in front of George, and you see through everything. I have sources. I also know you're getting along with the young bartender." I nearly spit out my tea laughing at what he said. After George is in an uproar, the manager took a liking to James, so he brought other colleagues along to the bar. That's when my boss said to James, "Do you have someone you're interested in here? Be honest." Directed by my manager's leading question, he looked at me while explaining. 23-year-old James had one-sided feelings for me. He seemed to have liked me since we met. James was self-deprecating about being immature and not being good enough for me, but the manager was adamant. "James, you're a great guy, his looks and personality. Go and tell her your feelings." I tried to stop the manager's momentum, but I got confessed by James. "I like you, Hannah. If you're okay with someone as inexperienced as me, let's get together." "Wait, I'm 29 years old. I'm 6 years older than you, and I'm divorced too." "That's not a problem. I like you, Hannah." And such a turn of events, I now have a 23-year-old boyfriend. My manager was overjoyed, saying, "I'm your wingman." I was thinking of telling my foster father later, but he found out I went to James's bar. He's a very nice young man. He's different from your ex-husband who would berate you. "Dad, you're moving too fast." My foster father has always been a warrior when it comes to me. Although he is an extreme person who can do so much to George, who disrespected me, he is a kind father. I am more than happy to be this man's daughter. Thank you, Dad. When I told my foster father and my feelings with a smile, he smiled back. Next time I take a break, I thought I'd go to the hot springs with my dear foster father. James will also be coming with us. I promised to marry him. Next time James is going to greet my foster father, I'm sure my father and James will make a good family. I reported to my father with a smile that I was going to start a new family. My father smiled and said, "Congratulations, Hannah.